In the world of high-stakes private equity, invisibility is not a flaw, it is a skill. And Bridget, no, that name was taken. Lena, taken too. Let me start where it matters. In the world of high-stakes private equity, invisibility is not a flaw, it is a survival strategy. And nobody had mastered it quite like Vivienne. Wait, I need to check the names first before writing. In the world of New York private equity, the most dangerous people are never the ones who announce themselves. 42 floors above Midtown Manhattan, in an office that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a month, Phoebe Drummond did not exist. That was not a complaint. It was, by every professional measure, her greatest achievement. She was 31 years old, the senior financial analyst for Harwick Capital, one of the most feared acquisition firms on the Eastern Seaboard, and she had spent 4 years making herself functionally invisible. She kept her dark hair pulled back. She wore charcoal and navy, colors that absorbed attention rather than invited it. She sat in the back during board presentations, even though she had written most of what was being presented. She answered emails at 5 a.m. and still somehow answered them again at midnight. She knew the cap tables of 37 portfolio companies by memory. She had never once been photographed at a firm event. She was, to put it plainly, the kind of woman that men like Damon Harwick looked through rather than at Damon Harwick. Even his name had weight to it, the kind of name that made junior analysts straighten their spines without realizing they were doing it. He was 40, the founder and sole managing partner of the firm that bore his name, and he had built it from a single brutal deal in his late 20s into something that rival firms referred to, mostly behind closed doors, as the machine. He was not conventionally attractive in any soft sense of the word. His jaw was too sharp, his eyes too calculating, his silences too deliberate. But the man could walk into a room full of wolves and make every single one of them remember who was higher on the food chain. That was its own kind of magnetism. Phoebe had worked for him for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She had been in the same elevator as him exactly 6 times. He had spoken to her directly on 3 occasions, and on 2 of those occasions, it was to ask where Marcus was. Marcus being the managing director who technically sat between them on the org chart, the man who presented Phoebe's work as collaborative while quietly taking the credit in rooms she was not invited into. The 3rd time Damon had spoken to her directly, he had said, "Good catch on the Trillium Covenant breach," and then walked away before she could confirm whether he even knew her name. She had saved the firm somewhere in the range of $40 million that quarter by catching that breach. He had said good catch like she'd retrieved a dropped pen. Phoebe had gone home that evening, eaten an entire rotisserie chicken over the sink, and decided that was fine, that was the job. That was what she had signed up for. The problem, the thing that cracked everything open, started on a Tuesday in March, when Marcus did not come in. He had called out sick, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that 3 hours later, the FBI showed up. They were not in suits exactly, or rather they were in the kind of suits that looked too ordinary to be ordinary. 2 of them. They had badges. They asked for Damon Harwick. His assistant, a young woman named Francesca, who had been at the firm for 8 months and spent most of those months looking faintly terrified, went pale and picked up her phone. Phoebe watched from her desk, which had a sightline to the elevators that she had specifically chosen for this exact kind of situational awareness. She watched, she noted. She pulled up the Trillium file, then the Orvant file, then the Marchetti bridge financing file. Something cold settled in her stomach. She had seen the patterns in those files. She had flagged 2 of them as irregular 7 months ago in a memo that had gone to Marcus, who had apparently done nothing with it. When the FBI agents were escorted to the conference room, Phoebe quietly copied 3 folders of documentation to an encrypted drive, saved it to a secondary location she paid for personally, and went back to her spreadsheet. She was not panicking. Panic was expensive. 40 minutes later, Damon Harwick walked out of that conference room and did something she had never seen him do in 4 years, 2 months and 11 days. He stopped in the middle of the open floor and looked around. Really looked, like he was counting his people, and suddenly wasn't sure of the number. His eyes landed on her. Not through her, on her. "Drummond," he said. Every head on the floor turned. Phoebe felt the attention like a physical weight, the sudden collective awareness of 23 analysts and associates suddenly wondering who Drummond was. She closed her laptop. "Yes, my office. Now." The walk from her desk to his corner office at the end of the hall was approximately 40 feet. She had walked past that office every single day for 4 years. She had never been inside it. It was larger than her apartment, which she was aware said something unfortunate about Manhattan real estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark walnut, a credenza with nothing on it but a crystal decanter and a phone, no personal photographs, no awards on the walls, just the city, spread out below like something he had personally acquired. He closed the door behind them. "Tell me what you know," he said. Phoebe looked at him. "About what specifically?" "About whatever it is you've been watching from that desk for the last hour." She had not realized he had noticed her watching. That was unsettling. She recalibrated. "The Marchetti Bridge deal had a documentation irregularity that I flagged in August," she said. "The Orvane secondary closing had a wire transfer pattern that didn't match the recorded cap table. And the Trellium situation, which you already know about, had a series of covenant modifications that Marcus signed off on without bringing to you." Silence. Damon Harwick looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at balance sheets, not reading them so much as absorbing them. "You sent that memo in August," he said. "To Marcus." "Yes. He told me you flagged a formatting issue." Phoebe said nothing. The understatement was so vast it didn't deserve a response. Something shifted in Damon's expression. It was not quite anger. It was something harder than anger. The look of a man recalculating a variable he hadn't known was in the equation. "How much do you have documented?" he said. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and placed the encrypted drive on his desk. He looked at it, then at her. "Sit down, Drummond," he said. "We're going to be here for a while." They were there for 6 hours. The FBI came back. A lawyer arrived. 2 more lawyers arrived. At some point, someone ordered food from a restaurant Phoebe had never eaten at because it had no prices on the menu, and she sat in a corner of the conference room eating a steak she couldn't identify the cut of and answering questions that got increasingly specific and increasingly important. She watched Damon Harwick across the table. He was in his element in a way that was almost unsettling, completely calm, completely controlled, running a crisis with the same flat efficiency she imagined he used to run acquisitions. He answered questions precisely, asked sharper questions in return, and twice redirected the entire thrust of the FBI's inquiry with a single observation that made the lead agent write something down very quickly. And occasionally, in the spaces between, he looked at her. Not the way he had looked through her for 4 years. Something different. Assessing. The way you look at something you've had in your hand for a long time without realizing what it was. She told herself it was the stress of the situation. They finished at 9:30 at night. The lawyers left. The FBI left, with copies of her documentation and promises of follow-up meetings. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago. The floor was dark and quiet, lit only by the ambient glow of the city outside, and the fluorescent pulse from the server closet down the hall. Phoebe put on her coat. "Where are you going?" Damon said. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway of the conference room, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking like someone had simply removed the top layer of him and found the same thing underneath. Sharp, deliberate, certain. "Home," she said. "It's almost 10. I need you to walk me through the Orvane irregularities again. The agents are going to come back with specific questions about the secondary tranche. I can send you my notes." "I don't want your notes," he said. "I want to hear you explain it." She set her bag down. They sat back down at the end of the conference table, the city glittering 42 floors below them, and she walked him through it, the wire transfers, the timing discrepancies, the shell entity she'd found, buried in a footnote of a 200-page subscription agreement that nobody read because subscription agreements were boring and long and written specifically to be both. She had read it. She had read all of them. At some point, she stopped being aware that she was talking to Damon Harwick and just started talking, the way she talked when she was alone with a problem and working it out, quickly, precisely, with a kind of low-grade excitement she usually kept very private, because people found it off-putting, the way some people found math teachers off-putting. When she stopped, he was looking at her. "How long have you known about the shell entity?" he said. 7 months. And Marcus told me it was above my pay grade and to focus on the Brennan refinancing. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind that meant someone was deciding what to do with information that was changing the shape of something they thought they understood. "You should have come to me directly," he said. "You don't have open-door hours, Mr. Harwick. You have a gatekeeper, a scheduling system, and a managing director whose job is explicitly to sit between your office and everyone below VP. I'm accessible." Phoebe looked at him. "You didn't know my name until today." It came out flatter than she intended. Not angry, just true. He didn't look away. "Drummond, Phoebe," she said. "My name is Phoebe." Something happened in his face that she couldn't fully categorize. Not embarrassment. She doubted Damon Harwick experienced embarrassment in any conventional sense. Something quieter than that. "Phoebe," he said, and the way he said it deliberately, like he was setting it somewhere he intended to find it again, made her forget for exactly 3 seconds that she was a senior analyst in a crisis meeting, and he was her employer's employer, and none of this was anything other than a very long and stressful Tuesday. She picked up her bag. "I'll have the full documentation indexed and ready for the follow-up meeting," she said. "If you want to prep beforehand, I'm available starting at 7. I'll have Francesca set it. She starts at 8:30. Then I'll call you directly." He said it like it was obvious, like it was something he should have been doing all along. "Give me your number." She gave it to him. He typed it into his phone without looking at the screen, watching her instead, which should have been unsettling, and was, in a way that she did not examine on the cab ride home. The next 2 weeks were the most professionally intense of Phoebe's life, which was a high bar. Marcus resigned. Officially, it was framed as a mutual parting. The reality, pieced together from the FBI follow-ups, and 2 very careful conversations with the firm's general counsel, was considerably more complicated, involving a side arrangement with one of the Orvane LPs that Marcus had been running quietly for 2 years and had apparently believed nobody would ever find because nobody had ever read a subscription agreement footnote that carefully before. Phoebe was promoted, not to Marcus's role, that was restructured, but to a new position that didn't have a clean precedent at the firm, one that Damon described in the single most professionally efficient sentence she had ever heard, as everything you've been doing plus the authority to actually do it. She got her own office. It was half the size of his, but it had a window, and she could see a triangle of actual sky between the buildings, which she considered a personal luxury. She told herself the new dynamic was professional, clean, that the thing that had shifted in that conference room was simply the correct alignment of skill to recognition, and nothing more. She told herself this convincingly for about 12 days. On day 13, Damon called her at 6:45 in the morning, which she had come to understand was simply how he communicated when something was urgent, and asked if she had read the preliminary term sheet on a new deal he was considering. She had. She had also found 3 structural problems with it. "Come up," he said. His office. 6:47 in the morning. She was still in the cab. She arrived at 7:03. He had coffee waiting, which he had apparently made himself from the machine on his credenza, because Francesca was not in yet. He pushed a cup toward her without asking how she took it. It was black. She drank it black. She didn't know how to process the fact that he had somehow known that. They worked for 2 hours before anyone else arrived. It became, without anyone explicitly deciding it, a pattern. Early mornings, late evenings. the structural problems with the term sheet, then the LP communication strategy, then the reorg of the portfolio reporting system that she had been quietly redesigning in her spare time for 3 months, and which he looked at for approximately 4 minutes before saying, "Build it out," and signing off on a budget she hadn't asked for. He started calling her Phoebe. Just that, her name in his voice, which was low and deliberate, and never wasted a syllable. She told herself she was not keeping track of how often he said it. She was absolutely keeping track of how often he said it. The thing that she could not afford to look at directly was this. Nobody had ever taken her seriously in quite the way Damon Harwick took her seriously. Not as a consolation prize, not with the faint condescension of someone deciding to be generous, not with the performance of open-mindedness. He listened to her the way he listened to his lawyers, like what she said was data, and data was the most valuable thing in the world, and she was currently producing an unusual quantity of high-quality data, and that was simply that. No preamble, no qualifications. It was, she realized somewhere around week 3, the most disorienting professional experience of her life. More disorienting than the FBI visit. More disorienting than the promotion. She was not equipped for this particular variety of being seen. The crisis that broke everything open happened on a Thursday. A competing firm, Veltri Partners, old money, old grudges, specifically old grudges against Damon that dated back to a deal he had won at their expense in 2019, had apparently decided that the Marcus situation was an opportunity. Someone had leaked a preliminary version of the FBI inquiry to a financial journalist, not the full picture. The selective version, the one that made Harwick Capital look like it had been running a scheme rather than uncovering one. The story went live at 11:17 on a Thursday morning. By 11:30, Phoebe's phone was ringing from 3 different LP representatives, and her inbox had 42 new messages. By 11:45, she was in Damon's office. He had already read it. He was standing at his window, looking at the city, and he had the specific stillness of someone who was extremely angry and had decided to be extremely controlled about it, which she had come to recognize as one of his more interesting qualities, and also one of his more alarming ones. "It's Veltri," she said. "I know." The timing of the quote about the Orvain closing matches a detail that was only in the preliminary inquiry summary, which means they have a source inside the FBI or inside one of the LP's legal teams. He turned from the window. "I know, Phoebe. I've already called our outside counsel. The LP calls are manageable," she said. "I have relationship context on most of them. If you let me take the calls directly and walk them through the actual timeline, that's my job. It's faster if we split them. You take the 3 who need to hear from you specifically. I'll take the other 8. She held up her phone. "I already have the documentation queued." He looked at her for a long moment. 8 calls, he said. "By end of day, by 3 o'clock, she said. "I type fast." Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. Not quite, but close enough that she filed it and moved on. She made the calls. He made his. By 2:47, every LP on the list had received a clear, documented account of the actual timeline of events, the extent of Marcus's actions, the firm's cooperation with the FBI, and a preliminary framework for the reputational remediation strategy that Phoebe had drafted on a legal pad during her lunch break, which she did not take. At 3:15, Damon appeared in the doorway of her office. "3 of mine are requesting a follow-up call with you specifically," he said. She looked up. "With me, they want the analyst who found the irregularities. Apparently word traveled." Phoebe absorbed this. It was not a small thing what he had just said. LP relationships were closely held, ego-adjacent, not typically delegated to anyone below managing partner. "I can do that," she said carefully. "I know you can." He leaned against the doorframe, and there was something different in the way he was looking at her. Not the assessing look, not the professional calculation. Something she didn't have a category for. "Drummond, Phoebe," she said, automatic. "Phoebe," and again the deliberate way, the way that made it feel like he was saying something more than a name. "Go home after the calls. You've been here since 6:45. So have you. I own the building. That is not a reasonable counter-argument. He was definitely almost smiling. Good night, Phoebe. She went home. She sat on her couch for a very long time without turning on any lights. She was in significant trouble. The thing about being invisible for a long time is that you forget your own edges. You learn to move around other people's spaces without displacing anything, without leaving marks. You stop expecting to be surprised. And then something, a look, a name said a certain way, 3 o'clock, calls that run to 4, a cup of coffee made exactly how you take it, starts to remind you that you have edges, that you take up space, that you are in fact present. Phoebe had built her invisibility carefully. She had built it because the alternative, being seen and then dismissed, being present and then overlooked, was worse than not being seen at all. She had learned this early, in ways that had nothing to do with finance. She had brought it into her career and sharpened it into a professional asset. She was very good at it. She was apparently not good enough, because she could not make herself not notice Damon Harwick noticing her, could not unknow the fact that he had learned how she took her coffee without asking, could not stop cataloguing the specific quality of the silence when they were working in the same room on separate problems, which was different from all other silences, which had a texture she did not have words for and chose not to look for. She was not a person who made problems for herself. She was, professionally and personally, someone who solved them. And yet, it was a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the Veltri story broke and had been largely neutralized, when things became impossible to manage. They had been working late, not unusual. A portfolio company had a board meeting Monday, and the materials were not where they needed to be. At some point, the building had gone quiet around them without her noticing. The floor was empty. The cleaning crew had come and gone. She was standing at the whiteboard in the small conference room off his office, the one they'd taken to using because it had a better surface area for working through structures. And she was in the middle of explaining a problem in the equity waterfall when she turned around and found him looking at her in a way that stopped her mid-sentence. Not at the board, at her. "What?" she said. He said her name. "Just that." Damon. Her own voice surprised her. She had not used his first name before. Not once in 4 years, 2 months, and whatever number of days it was now. The silence stretched. "This isn't," she started. "I know what this isn't," he said. "Then I also know what it is." She looked at him. He was standing very still, the way he stood when he had already decided something, and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to it. She had seen that stillness in boardrooms, across negotiating tables in the FBI conference room. She had never had it directed at her before. Not like this. "You employed me," she said. "You didn't know my name 4 months ago. I know your name now. That is an extremely low bar. Damon, 3 LP Relationships requested you by name last week," he said. "You restructured the reporting system in your spare time, and it's already saving us 12 hours a month across the portfolio. You found a fraud that nobody else in this firm found in 2 years." He paused. "And you drink your coffee black, and you eat lunch at your desk on the days when something is interesting, and you have not once in 4 years asked me for anything." She stared at him. "You've been watching me. I've been watching you," he agreed without apology, with that absolute Damon Harwick certainty that should have been infuriating and was something else instead. "For how long?" A beat. Something honest crossed his face. "Longer than I handled well." Phoebe set down her marker. She thought about 4 years of being looked through. She thought about the memo in August that went nowhere. She thought about 6 elevator rides and 3 conversations, and 1 good catch that had not included her name. She thought about 6:45 phone calls and black coffee, and her name said like it was being filed somewhere permanent. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me." "I am not interested in being a footnote, in anything, professionally or otherwise." She looked at him directly, the way she looked at balance sheets. Not to perform confidence, but because she had stopped being afraid of what she might find. If this is a thing that happens and then becomes a problem that I have to navigate alone while you move on, I would rather we don't. I am very good at my job, and I intend to keep being very good at my job, and I am not going to compromise that for Phoebe. He crossed the room, not quickly, deliberately, the way he did everything. I don't do things I intend to move on from. She looked up at him. He was closer than he'd ever been. Close enough that she could see the exact quality of the attention he was paying her, which was the same attention he paid to things he had decided mattered, and which was, she was realizing, the most dangerous thing about him. "This is a significant conflict of interest," she said. "Yes, would have opinions. Oha reports to me. That is exactly the problem I'm describing." "I'll restructure your reporting line," he said, "directly to the board, independent of my operational authority." He said it like he'd already thought about it, like it wasn't improvised. "You'd have full authority and zero dependency on my approval for anything operational." She stared at him. "You already thought about this. I think about problems before I create them." "When did you?" "6 weeks ago," he said. "When I realized I was looking for reasons to call you before 7 in the morning." 6 weeks. She calculated backward. That was early in the LP crisis. That was before she'd said, "You didn't know my name" in the conference room. She tried to reconcile this with 4 years of invisibility and found that she couldn't quite, and that the impossibility of reconciling it was doing something to the careful architecture of distance she had built around herself. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't." Something in him shifted, something less controlled briefly. "That's on me, Phoebe. The 4 years. That's on me," she breathed. Outside the windows, 42 floors below, the city moved through its Friday evening, indifferent and brilliant and relentless, the same city it had been every single evening she had stayed late in this building, believing she was invisible. "I want the independent reporting line in writing," she said. "Before anything else. Monday morning," he said. "My lawyer drafts it, and I retain my equity stake regardless of what happens between us personally, already in the framework." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had looked through her and was now, unmistakably, looking at her, at the absolute conviction in his face, which was not arrogance exactly. It was something closer to a person who had decided, fully and without reservation, and was done deliberating. She thought, "I have spent 4 years making myself small." She thought, "I am very tired of that." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. The official version, the one that made it into the quiet, firm communications and the murmur of industry gossip, was that Phoebe Drummond had been elevated to Chief Risk Officer of Harwick Capital, with an independent board reporting structure and an equity stake that put her among the firm's top 5 stakeholders, that she had been instrumental in uncovering the Marcus situation, that she had personally managed the LP relationships through the Veltri crisis. All of that was true. The rest of it was none of anyone's business. But on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when the quarterly LP meeting concluded and the last of the outside investors had filtered out of the 42nd floor conference room, Damon Harwick did something he did not typically do in professional settings. He reached across the credenza and picked up Phoebe's coffee mug, which she had left at his end of the table when she'd gone to pull up the final slide, and carried it to where she was standing by the window and handed it to her. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that meant nothing to someone looking in from the outside. One of the junior analysts, new to the firm, was still gathering his materials. He glanced up and caught the exchange, and there was a moment where he started to look away, the practiced reflex of not registering what didn't register, and then didn't because something about it made him look again. Phoebe took the mug. She didn't smile particularly. She just looked at Damon the way she looked at things she had fully evaluated and decided she was certain about. He looked back at her the same way. The junior analyst picked up his laptop and quietly left the room, and later, when one of his colleagues asked how the new CRO was she tough? Was she difficult? Was she someone to worry about? He thought for a moment and said, honestly, that she was the most competent person he'd ever been in a room with, and that the managing partner looked at her like she had solved every hard problem he'd ever had. Which was, more or less, exactly right.